We're now moving some distance to Tempe, Arizona. Peyton Jackson is going to take us to a place called the Tempe Butte and talk about the unique qualities of this particular location in the Sonoran Desert. Her thesis advisor was Professor Carl Bovel, Jana Vandergoot, and myself. I'm having trouble talking today. Maybe that's every day. At any rate, Peyton, it's all yours.
All right, thank you everyone for coming. I'd like to start out by thanking my committee for helping me through this journey that was Thesis. And especially thank you to Professor Bovel, who week by week put up with me in multiple meetings, always reminded me to relax and breathe. And also a special thank you to my parents. Without their love and support, I would not be here today, even though I told them they weren't allowed to fly in until this was over. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Sonoran Revival Defending Tempe Butte. So this thesis takes us out west to the Sonoran Desert, to the city of Tempe, Arizona. Tempe Butte is an isolated hill that is surrounded by the developing city of Tempe, which now serves as an icon to the residents of Tempe and also the students at Arizona State University. Once was the location of the prehistoric Native American community, the Hohokam. The Hohokam made the base of Tempe Butte their home, and eventually, after 1,000 years, they vanished from the area, and they left behind the remains of their community, also the remains of what was this butte covered in natural Sonoran plant life. The problem that this thesis addresses is that the city of Tempe is under attack. The city continues to encroach upon the butte as years pass, and destroying and abusing these cultural resources that were left behind by the Hohokam community. Not only are these Native American prehistoric resources abused and lost, it's also the intervention of the city with Tempe Butte is also destroying the natural Sonoran desert plant life that covers the butte. So I'd like to start out by introducing some more history about the Hohokam community. This Native American community settled around the year 1 AD around the base of Tempe Butte, which much of now is the Arizona State University campus. The community, known as La Plaza, was made up of large Native American community, but then they also settled up around the butte. A lot of the remains of the community have been lost and because of the development that rapidly grew around the Phoenix as a whole, but especially the area of Tempe. But this is an artist's rendering of another Hohokam community that is in another area of Phoenix called Pueblo Grande. So to kind of get an idea of what the La Plaza community looked like at the base of Tempe Butte, since there's not really any history or artifacts to go off of. So covering Tempe Butte are these remains of the Hohokam community that we're able to still see today. This pink shade is covering an area where there were once terraced farming gardens that the Hohokam community used to grow plants for them, plants for eating. And then also these purple dots are kind of showing where different artifacts can be found around the butte. These artifacts include pottery sherds. The Hohokam were very artistic people, and made their own pottery, and a lot of the colors kind of come from the natural reds and grays of the Sonoran Desert. And their pottery was covered with geometric designs and also designs that reference the natural landscape and also the animals that could be found in the area. Some more of the resources include, or some of these other pottery sherds, but also mete, which were these little kind of like grinder holes, which you could grind grains and things for their foods, which could be found around the Butte as well. And perhaps the most precious of these cultural resources are the prehistoric petroglyphs. These rock carvings were etched into the stones by the Hohokam people, and there's over 500 of them that can be found around Tempe Butte, which makes it actually one of the largest collections of this rock art in the state of Arizona. Kind of a closer look at some more of the petroglyphs that can be found on Tempe Butte, and a collection of both the petroglyphs and also some of the patterns that can be found on the pottery sherds that have been found on the Butte. And a lot of the designs that the Hohokam did, especially in the Tempe Butte area, were very geometric, when some of them kind of reference like some more human-looking forms, and then also some animals like lizards and small coyotes and animals that kind of lived around the Butte. And currently, you can still see these petroglyphs around the Butte when you're kind of hiking around, but there's also, at the trailheads, there's little notations of the forms that they take, kind of entering into the Butte. You can see these shapes of the petroglyphs that have been left behind. Along with the rich cultural history of the Butte, there's also a very dense and rich Sonoran desert plant life covering the entire landform, a lot of which is covered by the creosote bush, mesquite, and palo verde trees, all of which really thrive in the dry and very hot climate of the Sonoran Desert, and a variety of cacti adding kind of green to the area, but then their fruits and flowers blooming during special seasons after the monsoons each year, like the prickly pear and the barrel cactus. So the problem that is facing Tempe Butte now is the city that's encroaching on the landform. There's a number of threats that are making this problem such a big deal. One of them is ASU Sun Devil Stadium, which is the football stadium for the students at Arizona State, and it was built in the late 1950s. And it was built in kind of this saddle of the Tempe Butte, not so much on the main part of it. But even though it was kind of placed into the saddle that was already there, it destroyed a whole collection of some of the Hohokam terrace farming, and also destroyed hundreds of petroglyphs, which are kind of just lost to history forever now. So it's just part of the culture that was on the Butte that is no longer here for us to appreciate and learn from. There's also, at the very top of Tempe Butte, there's a communications tower, which is rather unsightly and covered in chain link fence, so you can't even hike up to the very top of it because there's this radio tower which isn't even in use anymore. These water tanks were placed or built on the southern side of Tempe Butte to serve the city of Tempe, and along with excavating to put those there, there was also a large paved path that had to be put along the south side of the Butte in order to get access to those tanks. While the light rail through Tempe is more of a positive thing because it's bringing more people into the area, during the construction, there was remains of the Hohokam community were found. So it's kind of accidentally stumbled upon these artifacts, which just kind of reinforces how important it is that we need to preserve and protect this area. There's also invasive species, buffalo grass and fountain grass, that is taking over the Butte, kind of taking away water and nutrients from these Sonoran Desert plants that are supposed to be thriving on the Butte, but they're being threatened by these plants, and they also cause a fire hazard. And one of the most crucial problems at the Butte right now is just the humans that are hiking around the area and who are putting graffiti on these petroglyphs or kind of making their own, like people carving ASU into the rocks and taking away from this history that is there from this prehistoric community. So the kind of driving force for the design for this thesis was to protect and preserve Tempe Butte. But I wanted to be careful that the design wasn't just another kind of human infrastructure encroachment on the building, like the water tanks or the radio towers, that it was actually incorporated into the Butte and that it celebrated what was going on and celebrating the landscape and kind of bringing awareness to these resources that are still being discovered around the area and on the Butte. So looking more at the building site, to the south, like I had mentioned before, is a lot of the ASU campus buildings, but then to the north there's fairly new commercial buildings and office buildings, and then a lot of kind of commercial residential to the west, and then the football stadium to the east. And then zooming in a little bit more, showing where that light rail goes just along the bottom of the Butte with 2 stops kind of on either side of the building area, making it very accessible. So now I'd just like to take you through a brief walking tour, kind of going around the Butte. This is at the base of one of the metro stops and at the trailhead moving up to one of the paved pathways. So these steps that kind of go along the southern side of the Butte. As it gets steeper, there's hand railings. And then kind of at the top looking down, you can see the letter A that the students at ASU kind of use as it's a sense of pride for their campus, and they paint it every football season. So that's very much incorporated in the Butte. And looking down, kind of getting more towards the building area. Looking down, getting another view of the metro line. And then these are views of the north side of the Butte, which there aren't actually paved pathways or trails at all. So people go off the path and go around the front side of the Butte or the north side of the Butte, trampoline on these desert plants, especially like cacti like the saguaro, which take over 10 years to just not even grow about a foot. Like it takes forever for them to have like enough structure to survive, and they're getting trampled on by these people who are going off of trails. And also some of the artifacts can get lost as people are going off of the trails to the north side of the Butte. This is a view from the bottom of the paved road looking up to the top, kind of getting a more a better view of where the building site will be. And then just kind of northwest of the building area is this large ditch, which is used for drainage during the heavy monsoon seasons twice a year. And then there's also the remnants of these 2 historic railroads and also the historic flour mill, which came along after the Hohokam people vanished from the area and settlers came in. So those have been preserved on the site to kind of keep that history alive. So with these current infrastructure conditions on the Butte, thinking about the thesis design, I had the idea that the radio tower, since it's not even being used anymore, and also these water tanks could be taken away from the Butte and also relocated, because they really don't they don't blend in with the natural landscape. They kind of just look like really people place them right onto the Butte. They don't really interact with the area, and they were harmful in their construction. While some of the other infrastructure that is incorporated into the Butte, like the historical railroads and the flour mill and this letter A that's kind of a source of pride for the students, were elements that I wanted to keep on the Butte because they kind of kept that history alive as well. So some design strategies I thought through in the thesis process. The Sonoran Desert has this hot climate with the summers going into the 110 degrees for multiple days and sunshine all the time. And so it's important to get natural light into the buildings, but also you have to have shade because they just turn into an oven in the July in Arizona. So these perforated screens were something that I wanted to incorporate into my building because they still allowed visuals into the building and out of the building, but also protecting the people inside from the solar heat that's coming in. And dealing with the water runoff, having another alternative to this large ditch that's just kind of off behind the flour mill to the side of the building site. And also keeping in mind the natural colors that come with the landscape of the area, with the kind of pinks and purples and greens of the cacti, and also the reds and grays of the rock and the dirt from the Sonoran Desert. So with my building design, I really wanted to defend Tempe Butte. So I incorporated a building design that didn't want to be an encroachment on the building, to really be a part of the building and kind of grow out of it and serve as an architectural frame for appreciating the landscape that is there, because it's such a unique landscape that can only thrive in such certain climates. And also a building that's programmed within can serve as a type of repository for the artifacts that have been found on the Butte and also the ones that continue to be found, so we won't lose these pieces of history that initially were kind of destroyed and just lost. So I'd kind of like to walk you through the building, through the circulation core. Beginning at the ground level, you enter through this tunnel-like area into the ground floor, where there's kind of an entry booth where you can buy your ticket to the gallery in the building, and also a gift shop. And then you kind of look up this hole through the middle, and there's this circulation stair, which you take up to level 1. Level 1 is dedicated to the employees of the building, and has offices and conference rooms, and also this large workspace, which can be used for the preservation and protection of these artifacts that can be used. And it's kind of a curtain wall along that side of the workspace, so visitors to the Butte, they're not granted access into that space. It's more private, but they can see what's going on and see these artifacts actually being protected and preserved. And as you start moving up the staircase even more from this core of the building, you can start to get views outside with light coming down. And then up to the level 2, you can finally see the Butte in the background. And level 2 has this spacious kind of lobby area which can be rented out, which in this section drawing is having an event for a celebration after an archaeological type of discovery, where there's a presentation about these new artifacts that have been found to kind of piece together even more of the Hohokam history that we don't entirely know all about. And then also at this level, moving out from this event space, is the Sonoran Desert Garden. And so while Tempe Butte is covered in these natural plants, the garden space can really put them all together and really allow them to thrive in this area, with the kind of palo verde and mesquite trees growing amongst the creosote bushes and the different types of cacti. And then also the garden kind of extends up the Butte as it starts to incline, and there's kind of a reference back to the Hohokam terraced farming, where there are these terrace planters that help with water drainage, water runoff. And then at the very end of the Sonoran Desert Garden, there's a swale kind of surrounding the buildings to help with the water that is pouring off there that initially was all going into that ditch at the end of the site. And then eventually, at the third level, make your way to the top of the stairs, where you're at the top of this glass circulation box, and that's the level of the gallery space, which is filled with the artifacts that have been found on the Butte, which will be found around the Butte, and these artifacts that have been preserved in the workspace that the employees of the building have been protecting for us to learn about, so we can know more about this culture. So this view is from the landscape garden, looking back to the building in another view of kind of showing those perforated screens like I had shown before, about really letting the views out to the landscape and the butte to still be very much intact, even though there's these shades that are kind of guarding you from the solar heat that's coming in. And the see-through glass circulation core of the building, in contrast with the kind of reddish orange tiles that cover the outside of the building, which are referenced back to the Sonoran colors of the dirt. So in conclusion, with this thesis design, I really wanted to introduce a building that celebrated the landscape and celebrated the rich historical resources that are found on this butte, which many people don't know about. I was born and raised in Phoenix, and I didn't know about all these artifacts until I started the research for this project. So to really bring awareness, because once these artifacts are destroyed or lost, then they're really gone forever. And now I'd like to open it up for discussion.
Beautiful presentation, both your presentation of your work and the way you've decorated the wall. I'm curious about your program. Well, first of all, I think you took on what looks to be kind of a hopeless situation.
Yeah.
So I commend you for your thesis, taking on a site and a situation as challenging as you have. Mm-hmm. The fact that that the University of Arizona, or the Arizona State is part of the problem, I think there might have been an opportunity, and I think your program and the size of your building allows for it, for some kind of research partnership, whether they have an American Studies program or an environmental studies program, that there could be, which I think there could be a cross collaboration, and I think that would only enrich getting the community to appreciate the artifacts that are there. Is it currently an archaeological site?
It
or
is.
Could it be?
It could be. It's now just it's a preserve. In 2002, it's the Hayden Mountain Butte Preserve. So it's not an archaeological site officially.
One other comment, I wondered if you looked at buildings in the desert and materials and how buildings meet the ground, such as Taliesin West comes to mind. I think there might be some opportunities to think about how the building meets the ground. I know you're trying to be very sensitive to the history and the landscape, and you were very careful in not branching out with walls and that sort of thing, and really kind of taking over the site. That's all.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Great project. I want to echo what was mentioned about how the building touches the ground. I've heard of the name and actually could spell it correctly without ever knowing anything, because it's something that's sort of in the back of your mind. Growing up in the States, you hear about Tempe.
Yeah.
But so thanks for introducing us. I think it's quite a sacrilege what's done to the site by the university, and also all the various components that I think they've sort of bastardized this very awesome natural piece. For example, the water tank is sort of like a tower, and then putting a stadium. It almost looks like they gouge that land, because I see here where it looks like it's part of the Tempe.
Yeah.
But they sort of just
It was. They were
bastardized
kind
way.
of. They kind of tried to make an excuse saying they're putting it into the satellite
In a
view,
bowl.
but still had to excavate
I think
money.
it's a sacrilege. Having said that, and I actually wonder, it's just getting me to wonder about your project and the siting of it. First question I would ask is, why did you site the building where it is on the mountain, and why on the mountain? Because in a sense, I would hope that you're not contributing to the same thing that those other people have done to this special place. And if you're forced or compelled to have to do your project on this mountain, could you have used existing structures so you're not contributing? You know, for example, I look at those tank farms, I'm like, what are they? Are they still in existence? You know, could you have taken that over and actually do your project there without having to disturb these historic artifacts that might exist on the site? Secondly, if you're being forced away from that, let's say that's tanks still serves the university and the populace, and you're trying to put a building, could you have done it off-site, you know, across the road, you know, as almost like this visitor center where people are arriving without any sort of look at the globe. To me, I sort of see this as almost like Ayers Rock in Australia, this sort of outcrop, and then putting a building on it. It blows my mind. And if you're forced to put a building on it, as you were mentioning, could you have sort of, you look at the work of Glenn Murcutt, where you sort of touch the earth lightly and just sort of place a building without disturbing the ground or having to like, I mean, I look at your section where you have, you know, foundations that going into the rock. And essentially sort of doing the same thing as these other people that did this intervention. And I wonder if there's a way that you could have done this sort of desert type architecture that you just sort of lightly place on the site without disturbing much. It allows the site to go through and under your building and allow you to observe the site, you know, while you're exhibiting your building. Is that something that you considered as before? I mean, I see those models there as sort of like your prototype. Were you looking at other structure type one and also site, any other site where you ended up?
I did initially explore having the building kind of in that parking lot area, which is just at the base of the butte. So, yes, it's that one kind of at the corner. But as I kind of kept on doing more and more iterations of like a partie of how that would work out, the building just kept getting closer and closer to the butte and kind of moving up the slope a little bit more. And I think a lot of the, or at least a lot of the inspiration with that was to have this connection with the landscape, to have it really kind of become part of what's already there and to help flourish or allow it to flourish even more. And which I did definitely kind of go back and forth about, am I just putting as much of an encroachment on this building as the water tanks and as just plopping the stadium right there. But with kind of creating this landscape garden that then gives back to the butte some more and kind of helps with that natural plant life that's already growing there, allow it to kind of flourish even more, and having this building kind of become a part of the butte. I took that as more of a reason of how it's not so much as a water tank plopped on the top. But I did definitely think about kind of having the building completely off of the butte, but I wanted a stronger connection.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I have a question about the site circulation and you know, do you see this building as somehow serving as a gateway or an introductory, as part of an introductory sequence to kind of, you know, control or mediate circulation and access to the butte?
For the ground level entry is mostly kind of the circulation that goes all through all 4 floors is really for like the employee workspace and the event space lobby area and the gallery at the very top. But once it opens up into the garden in the back of the building, there's also these trailheads, which this one continues on to an existing trail, but I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this earlier, but in the garden, a new trailhead is introduced. So these hikers have access to a different area of the butte, but it's also kind of set aside so they're not wandering around the north side where they were kind of trampling desert life to that.
But how do you come from the parking? Are you
coming from the park, like into the entry of the building?
Yeah, how do you get to the building?
So the parking is still located in the corner, the southwest corner, and then the building is kind of on the same axis as the topography as it kind of curves around there like the metro line. And then you enter through the ground level, so you go underground a little bit as you're carving into the mountain at the ground, this floor.
Right, so essentially, I'm trying to understand your intentions in terms of bringing people like under or into the Butte and then bringing them up into this glass box as a way of introducing people to the Butte. So I mean, I guess that's a powerful sequence, but I didn't really hear you kind of express that as a part of your thesis or as a part of your idea for helping people to understand what the Butte is, or is there something that happens when you kind of go underground there and dig into the Butte, or is that where you kind of see the petroglyphs or the examples of some of the archaeological finds?
So the sequence from starting at that ground level and moving up really came from the circulation stair that's having this natural light coming in from the top 2 floors, level 3 and level 2, and having that light kind of move all the way through to the ground level. So you are moving in kind of into this little excavated area at the ground level, and then having this light come down, and then you kind of follow the light up the stairs, and then you eventually are looking out to this frame of the Butte, and then work your way even higher up into the gallery where you get an even higher view of the Butte. So it's kind of like a celebratory sequence, moving from the ground up into the gallery space. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I just didn't, I apologize if I wasn't paying attention at the time, but what happens in that box?
At the ground level?
Yeah.
It's at the entry kind of desk with tickets for the gallery space and for the museum area, and then there's also a gift shop for the museum that's at the top floor.
Because part of me wants to understand what happens. This is a building that has an opportunity to engage a really unique landscape, a really unique landform, and I think it would be a missed opportunity perhaps just to think of it as a 9-to-5 kind of thing, because obviously people are going to be wanting to access this area and to understand it, at different times of the day, maybe when it's not possible to have this thing open. So I like the idea of really kind of understanding the many, not that many, but the different strategies for the building to engage the landscape. And then how those different strategies could be used to kind of frame a gateway to the experience of this unique landform that could function maybe 24/7, even when the thing is closed.
Yeah.
Because I think, I think if you look at the typology that you're talking about, really, I think that's a characteristic that some of them have. I mean, in terms of these kind of, nature centers, or when you go to a national park, let's say, that they're really engaging you as part of a sequence, and that, I guess that's kind of one thing that I'm kind of missing, and then the other is just whether you investigated the different ways of making walls or making terraces in this kind of landscape. Whether it's rammed earth construction or other kinds of things that would more literally kind of reference the material that the Butte is made of. Did you look at any of that?
Yes, I did look into rammed earth as a material. I eventually went on with using concrete construction. So like both of the sections, I'm having the concrete serve as the structure for these kind of 3 main portions of the building, but then having more of a lightweight steel construction with the glazing for the circulation core. But having this concrete kind of resemble the hard rock that is made up of this volcanic butte. So since I did stick with the rammed earth, I kind of had it reflected into the exterior facade, still carrying on those colors of the natural kind of dirt and oranges and reds that the rammed earth displays.
So it's just to kind of add to a point I made earlier and also the point that was raised. I think personally, for me, I think if you're going to engage the Butte, then it behooves you to sort of do an exploratory sort of survey of the Butte itself to see where it is appropriate to site your building for various reasons.
Yeah.
You know, for accessibility, for education, programmatic educational purposes. You know, are there things about, because you do want to teach people about the Butte as a visit.
Yeah.
And I wonder if the sort of formation of your building takes advantage of crevasses and whatnot that exist on the site, so you can sort of place your building into it gingerly and allow people to actually come up close to the Butte, to the geology, or to the sort of like the formation of the Butte.
Yeah.
You know, you look at that back wall on the ground level there, where you just put a solid wall. I'm like, how come that's not part of the rock expression?
Yeah.
That sort of abuts itself into your program. People can act, and it could be treated in various ways. You could put a glass vitrine over it so people don't touch it, but they can observe it up close and see sort of like the history and the strata of the rock formation there. I guess because volcanic rock is not sedimentary, it's not going to have strata. But these sort of potential archaeological finds that you might find on the site, again, it goes to the exploratory nature of like canvassing the site appropriately before you place the building, so you can take advantage of some of these things that exist on the site without too much. Because one thing that you'll find if this were a real project, is the first moment you start digging and you find an archaeological component, it suspends your project for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
You know, so to actually do this as a real project, you'd have to do an exhaustive survey, and then for various reasons think of how you're going to site the building in the best way to serve not just the site, but you and the program. Because I look at that, I think that perspective behind you there, the middle perspective, I wish you had put that on the wall. So one thing that the sequence that you were describing as you come in, I actually think that could be quite interesting as you walk into this cavern. You see sort of the rock give way, you can kind of almost touch it. It's almost like going into what's the caves in France with the yeah, it's like you sort of walk in and you see all these like history that's on the wall as you're walking into your building. I think that could be interesting.
Yeah.
I do think your terracing, your section is quite evocative, you know, besides the wall of how your program meets the mountain. But those terracing, you know, those garden spaces that you're showing where the mountain or the Butte becomes a backdrop to sort of like these outdoor spaces, I think it could be quite interesting. But it might be a matter of, it might be a subjective thing. If I were doing it, I probably would have veered it differently. Not to discount the way you've approached it, but obviously the way you've approached it raises some question, which is why we're sort of asking these questions.
Excuse me. I know I've been down there several times to ASU and sat in reviews and the like. And there's a tradition for a lot of the people down there they're very gentle in relationship to the land. And it is a very, very harsh climate. And so the responses to the buildings are usually to protect the people, but also to respond to the land. What I'm seeing is that this building isn't really of that same sort of same language. I mean, what Bruder does and Burnett does and Jones, and I mean, there's slews and slews of good precedents. Even Frank Lloyd Wright, not too far away. Most of them have set their buildings up as safe environments for people to be in, but also responsive and responsible towards the landscape. And I think certainly everybody's been skirting about it kind of politely that you're putting this rather large building right smack dab on the land, which you've just told us you want to protect. And you're raising, it becomes quite polemic. So I guess in my mind, I'm trying to figure out why you've set it up in that way, and why you didn't set up the building in a more defensive stance, perhaps even as a protection. It's a wall. You can't go and get rid of these stupid ASU students. I mean, they are really. They're desecrating the land. They're irresponsible. Drunk bombs and all that sort of stuff. Go to the University of Maryland. Be responsible. Drink when you're 21. All that kind of stuff. And so it raises. I mean, it is very polemical in that sense because it's the opposite of what you would expect. You'd expect this something to be discreet or even lift itself up or pull itself away, or I'm even thinking of those beautiful little structures they put in the tenant gardens, which really just lightly touch the land and are all about making sure you don't get fried when you're out there, but that you can still appreciate all the different kind of land, all the plants and vegetation. So it's difficult to create. My role, I always think, is to be constructive, to engage what the polemic is, what you're coming up with, to respond, to look for sort of positive forms of encouragement, and breathe air into it. And you're setting it up in a way that's almost antagonistic to what you're saying. And do you understand the dilemma that it sets, at least for me, and I suspect for most of my colleagues? Yes.
I mean, you did spend a fair amount of time talking about the ditch, and you kind of brought it up. So I think that's why when you make this cut in the landscape, it's a very powerful gesture. And I think, you know, if we were able to understand the cut that you're making in relationship to the cut that already exists in the natural sense, you know, then I think there would be this dialogue that could begin to be established. And I think if then the building acts more like a bridge, it could achieve a lot of the things that, for me, would be important, which would be just to make the site accessible, but to make this kind of threshold to the site, rather than trying to control this very precise architectural experience that you've created in this glass box. Because I think coming under the building would be very sheltering. It would be very cool. And then you come out into the blistering sun, And so the other thing I think that, these terraces might want to kind of address is the kind of the total lack of shade. I mean, it's just brutal. And when you're in the desert, there's no place to hide. And you do want to stand, you do want to find that kind of rock to hide under almost, because that's where the coolness is. Because the rock's still, kind of drawn to the coolness. I think, those kind of conditions are conditions that are difficult to for architects to kind of replicate. But I think, I think there's some examples where people have tried, and somewhere they've even been very successful at kind of creating this kind of magical dialogue between this kind of man-made, very abstract language and this kind of these natural, very powerful landforms. And it's just totally unexpected landform, and it's just really striking.
Along Mill Avenue, where they have all the shops and they have all those, I don't really know what they call it, these sprinkler devices where you go along.
Kind of misters coming out.
Misters, exactly. And they also have it in the courthouse there that Richard Meyer did. And it's, for me, when I go out there, that's really one of the great inventions that I found for that particular climate. So they're all dealing with this idea that you put the water out there, it evaporates, and then in the evaporation it cools, which is something I've never really thought of. And I forgot who it was who's been putting all that water in there so that used to people went out there because it was so low in terms of humidity, but now because of all these retired people go out and they all irrigate their front yards, and so the humidity level's gone up. So it's created a real different kind of ecological problem for the area. these are all issues that I think you can bring up and you can grab. They're all there. They're all part of the problem of the thing that you can address in your building.
Yeah.
So not only is this history of absolutely devastating previous cultures, I mean, in a very colonial and really quite cruel and devastating manner, which I think your research facility would be about. You'd say, okay, we screwed up. We're going to learn the lessons from the past. And part of it is that we don't colonize in this way. How do you grab all the things that are good and bring them to your building? And I'm postulating those as so the ideas of where you spring forward in terms of your design. Because it strikes me that you've got this knowledge now and you understand it, and you sort of frustratedly say, okay, I'm going to build a building so that we can learn these things. And I'm saying here, as an architect, as a professor, go, yes, previous groups have screwed up. Yes, we've got this incredible site. Yes, we know all of it. How do you grab each and every one of those things and make positive of it? And then your program is that it's going to be it's almost like a war council. It's going to be a place where we're going to learn and we're going to go forward constructively in the future. And that's the part where I'm still waiting, because I'm seeing it's much more reactionary. It's, okay, we're going to get all these sort of well-meaning educators to come in, and once a year we're going to have these big, huge events, and we're going to eat whatever, all the local food, or too many steaks, or whatever they... I always see these big steakhouses out there. It surprised me, because I thought that's not really good in terms of the environment. But, so what do you do? What do you do with this thing? Particularly since you're a native. Where do you go positive on this thing? Where do you say, first of all, what's great about being out there and being fried and worrying about skin cancer and things like that? How do we make those positive experiences? And how do we make that a really, really, really great place to be? What's nice about being outside there? What's nice about being inside it? You know, maybe we burrow into the ground to stay cool, but we come out in a sort of architecturally responsive. All of these things are part of the program, I think, that you bring to the table in a really exciting way. And then increasingly, your building sits as an object, and you can sneak up the hill and walk up and down if you're silly enough to do that, or maybe first thing in the morning or late in the afternoon. How does it look back out over Phoenix? How does it engage the water? These are all, I think these are the next steps in your building. To really enjoy your site and to take all those things in a critical manner and respond positively.
I'm sorry. If I got to I think it's quite imperative that you do, with a project like this, that you do almost like an exhaustive, again, I was mentioning sort of canvassing where you site the building, but also contextually, because I'm still trying to find the reason why you cited the building where it is. That's why I've been staring literally intensely at these items all day, trying to find the reason, except for that parking lot that exists there. Like, why there? Why not around the corner on the other side facing the water? Are there climactic reasons why you cited it there, that you wouldn't find on the other side? Is it the way people from town approach the waterfront? Is that why you cited it there? And I think having those kind of diagrams would help you determine some of these questions that we're asking, determine the answers to some of these questions that we're asking. Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, your project is cited off of Mill Ave.
Yes.
That little triangular parking lot there. I'm like, why there? There's another parking lot on the other side next to the university that's quite expansive. Why not? Yeah.
Okay, I get the last thing here. It's much steeper over here. One of the things, if you look at where this sort of archaeological kind of stuff is, there's less of it here. I think it is the appropriate place to put it. There was discussion of how maybe this shouldn't have been up on the hill. I think it belongs a little bit up on the hill, frankly. And this hill is being abused. And it's obviously important to the city because they didn't build buildings all over it, in the past years. But to put a sort of museum, where the public can see the architecture, the archaeological kind of stuff, hopefully reinforces that this is an important place. And so therefore, I think it is appropriate for it to be on the hill. This business of coming in here, this does bring you down into the hill. It's also a really simple device to get handicap access into it without all kinds of crazy ramps and stuff to get up. You know, and I need to thank Peyton for educating me about the Butte and the importance of the Butte and how it's being abused, and thank her for taking a shot at producing something that might save it, might tell people that this is an important thing we need to stop messing with. She didn't mention it a whole lot, but she talked about fixing the trails. If you fix the trails and put signage and stuff, you might get people, I don't know about drunk college students, but you might get people to stay on the trails. And therefore, these things don't get painted over and walked over and all that kind of stuff. So thank you, Peyton.
Thank you.